Aloha, and welcome to this presentation of the Vegan Society of Hawaii. We are so happy today to welcome our special guest, John Pierre. Throughout John Pierre's 40 years of experience in the nutrition and fitness field, he has sought to develop cutting-edge programs combining science and traditional methods for athletes as well as for his other clients. He has authored 2 books, The Pillars of Health, Your Foundations for Lifelong Wellness, and Strong, Savvy, Safe, Empowering Tools for Self-Protection and Vibrant Health. John Pierre's talk today is entitled Plant-Based Motion. Aloha, John.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. We have a lot to cover today. I want to just give you a quick introduction, a little bit about my past, some of the things I've done and what I do, and we'll get right into it. But as you mentioned, Lorraine, I've been doing this for vegan for about 40 years now and teaching almost as long. And really, most of my career was in geriatrics. Actually, it was closer to over 30 years ago where I created the first brain building programs in the United States, actually in Chicago, using a plant-based diet, some different nutraceuticals. And then what I did, which was very unique, aside from bringing in the foods and taking the seniors on field trips to get healthy foods, then I would create boot camps inside the retirement homes and senior centers to stimulate that neuroplasticity and really stimulate their brain to get them moving, which was one of the best things from that oxygenation and the stimulation, because they were usually sitting in chairs all day long or lying in bed. And then what I did is I create classes that were coursework where we had to do all sorts of different mental exercises. We'd start with simple things like counting 1 to 10, but you have to spell each number. So ONETWO, THREE. And we time that. We want to see how fast somebody can be. Then we did all sorts of different other activities. I'd have them sit down as soon as they got in and write their name with their opposite hand 10 times. Well, that was closer to 30 years ago. I would teach boot camp. At 6 a.m., I would do a boot camp. 9 a.m., I'd do a boot camp. And then for the rest of the day, I'd be either at retirement homes or at my office seeing clients. And then at 6 p.m., I'd do another boot camp. My whole career was pretty active working with clients. As I was mentioning earlier to Dr. Heidrich, I love the science and I still study the science. We have to do that. But I think one of the things is when you work with clients individually, everyone is biochemically different and they're emotionally different. And everyone has had a different level of trauma and experiences in their life. That makes the way that they interpret what you say and the way you teach them different for each person. I think that's what I'm most proud of is all the gazillions of clients that I've worked with individually, because I think that's one of the reasons I can relate very well to clients, because my client load would be kids with Down syndrome, senior citizens, people with dementia or Lewy body dementia or MS, or some people that were just had attention deficit. So I worked with a lot of different people. But a lot of my work ended up being with athletes. I was working with military and law enforcement, and I've worked with professional athletes and semi-pro athletes. One of the main things that I learned working with everyone was that when I transitioned people to a plant-based diet, because most of them weren't plant-based, that's when the magic really started to happen. Once I started changing their diet, and I did it very slowly with a lot of the people, but that's when I really start seeing changes in not only the color of their skin, but the way they were breathing and different biomarkers. I would make sure that people could get up and down off the floor. That's an important biomarker of aging. How well can they balance on one leg? And as their diet improved and we made changes in their lifestyle, that's when I really start realizing the power of a plant-based diet. And plant-based diet's been in the news. It's everywhere you go. You can't pick up a magazine or go on Instagram or watch a TV show without a reference to plant-based diets. But the cool thing is that now everywhere we go, plant-based diets are in the gym. They're at athletic. Anytime there's an athletic event, there's always these plant-based athletes. And that's exciting because that was the group that really poo-pooed veganism or plant-based eating a long time ago. But now with all the science, you really can't deny the benefits of plant-based eating. You can't deny it. And then with all these athletes coming out, when people watch Game Changers, it was a game changer because now you couldn't deny it. You see some of the strongest people, some of the greatest athletes, best endurance, fastest athletes, most coordinated athletes, say in tennis, were all plant-based. One of the questions that I get all the time is when I start working with people, they obviously, if they've seen my website or if they've heard about me or seen my book, but they always want to know, do I need to be plant-based to be a better athlete? And one of the main things that I say to people is that one of the main things that we know for sure is that the stronger your heart is. Dr. Ruth Heydrich, she's been doing endurance events forever. Her heart has a wonderful stroke volume. It just pumps a massive amount of blood throughout the body. And as people get older, we're particularly concerned about the brain and those vertebral and carotid arteries getting good blood flow through there. One of the benefits of exercise we know is a strong heart. But having a strong heart is not enough. One of the things I let my clients know is you have to have wide blood vessels. You can't have occlusions or atherosclerosis in there and blockages, because no matter how strong the heart is, it's going to be pumping blood through tiny little openings, and that creates high blood pressure and ischemia. It's basically preventing a good perfusion of blood to the tissues. One of the things that I explain to clients is that one of the main benefits of a plant-based diet is those arteries are opened up. That's one of the main benefits that people generally who follow a healthy plant-based diet don't get the atherosclerosis. Now, they can have a genetic issue or some heart abnormality genetically, but generally their arteries are going to be very, very wide, and they don't get the atherosclerosis that most Americans would get, especially people following a junk food diet. And I think Dr. Dean Ornish was really one of the first in the early 90s to show that a plant-based diet with some stress reduction and motion can reverse atherosclerosis. And Dr. Esselstyn and others have come after him, repeated these experiments, and we've seen this. It's a fact. What I try to explain to my clients is that one of the ways exercise helps is it gets a better stroke volume. But one of the ways that we couple exercise with a plant-based diet, one of the reasons is because we have these clean arteries and we don't have the plaque in there. Now, somebody comes to me that's a vegan. They said, well, I exercise and I don't eat animal products. Okay, well, there's certain things that you can do that constrict arteries, like stress, a high salt diet, and different saturated fats and things like that. So one of the main advantages of a plant-based diet is the creation of nitric oxide. And nitric oxide is really it's a colorless gas that gets secreted from the endothelial inside the artery. And it's a signaling neurotransmitter. It fights bacteria and viruses. It helps with like glucose uptake. It helps regenerate mitochondria. But one of the main benefits of nitric oxide is it's a vasodilator. And vegans have some of the highest nitric oxide because nitric oxide is created ultimately from green leafy vegetables. The green leafy vegetables have nitrates. And on the dorsal or the rear portion of the tongue, that bacteria combines with those nitrates and it forms nitrites. And then that gets into the stomach and into the bloodstream, creating nitric oxide. That signals to the artery, the muscles to relax and open up the artery. Now, that is probably really one of the main benefits of a plant-based diet is that the arteries are constantly being opened up and more blood is allowed to flow. That's really the secret weapon to a plant-based diet. And when I was working with, I don't know if any of you have seen the documentary Earthlings, but Sean Munson, who did Earthlings, and it was a life-changing documentary. I mean, it's one of the nicknames is the Veganator, because so many people in the vegan movement who saw it went vegan, when they weren't. So he came to me at 40 years of age. And he said to me, he was 6'2", 165 pounds. He said, I want to see what a 40-year-old vegan can do, because he was getting older and he was used to seeing young vegans. And I said, okay, well, let's go at it. To make a long story short, he went from 165 pounds to 215 pounds and just became a vegan Frankenstein. And one of the main reasons that he was able to exercise at such incredible volumes and had such great endurance is because I kept his nitric oxide level so high constantly. And I'll explain how we do that. But for most of you, the main thing to remember is that every time you're eating these green leafy plants, you are creating this nitric oxide and it's opening up your arteries, just like Viagra or like nitroglycerin would do. And it's allowing that heart to pump more blood to the muscles and especially to the brain, and it's delivering more nutrients. Imagine that if you have somebody following a standard American diet who has very poor circulation, they don't have a good stroke volume, their arteries are occluded, and they're not opening up. Imagine comparing them to an athlete or somebody who's vegan where their arteries are clean and open. It's almost not even a fair competition in sports because the vegan athlete or the vegan person is getting such a greater blood flow and more nutrients and oxygen to the tissue. That's one of the reasons why almost all the endurance athletes that we see are plant-based, because it gives them such an edge with that vasodilation. One of the things that you should know is, as a vegan, that if you want to continue to have this vasodilation, and by the way, the nitric oxide gets a little bit impeded as you get older. So every year that you're aging, you're not really producing as much nitric oxide. Now, there's different pathways to create nitric oxide. We're not going to get into that. The arginine, citrulline, there's nasal nitric oxide, the way polyphenols work in the stomach to create it. But the main thing for you to understand is that if you're getting older and you're an athlete, you really have to make sure you pay close attention to the amount of nitric oxide your body's able to produce. That really means that you need to up your intake of green leafy vegetables. And in my opinion, you should get into some juicing of greens, because this way you can let that juice sit on the back of that dorsal area of your tongue and let that bacteria interact with those nitrates and create more nitric oxide. Now, as you get older, you also, hopefully you're eating healthy, but there's many things that can impede nitric oxide production, like mouthwash. Mouthwash is one of the most dangerous things that you can do because it's destroying the bacteria that helps convert those nitrates to nitrites to nitric oxide. So mouthwash, fluorinated water wouldn't be good. Even proton pump inhibitors cause an issue. Those are things that a lot of people in a meat-based diet always need mouthwash, especially people eating a lot of cheese or dairy. They get a lot of congestion. And they're the people who generally need mouthwash the most. But as you become a vegan and you're eating clean, you can wake up in the morning and you don't need mouthwash. Thank goodness for that. But remember that as you get older, you're going to need to produce more nitric oxide to give you an edge. Eating green leafy vegetables is good, but it would be better to add some green powder and drink it, or to have a green juice would be beneficial. Now, the other thing that you can do to increase nitric oxide is nasal breathing. When you're breathing through your nose and then out through your mouth, you're increasing more nitric oxide production. The parasinuses here help produce that nitric oxide when you breathe in through your nose. So that gives you a little bit of an edge also. If you want to start training when you're exercising, you could start doing some repetitions just through your nose, a little bit of jogging through your nose and then out through your mouth. It takes a little training because your body's trying to get used to the carbon dioxide level that gets built up, and you're not used to it because there's receptors that are telling you, hey, carbon dioxide's getting high, start breathing, but you get used to it. But try to do some nasal breathing if you can. And if you can't do a lot of nasal breathing, try to do humming, because humming can stimulate nitric oxide production 15 times. Just doing some humming before you exercise, or when you wake up in the morning, or when you have a low in the afternoon, doing a little humming is critical. When I'm working with my clients, I have them lay down and we do some stretches, and then I have them hum for a minute, and then we do other stuff, and then we come back to humming for a minute, do some other stuff, and we come back. I'm constantly throughout the session with them having do humming and doing nasal breathing, which is really critical. The other thing that happens is when you eat a diet that's high in polyphenols, and there's probably 8,000 different polyphenols in the plant-based world that we know so far, these also help with nitric oxide. One of the advantages of a plant-based diet versus a meat-based diet is that people eating a paleo-type diet or carnivorous diet, they're not getting a full spectrum of polyphenols. They're not getting it in their animal products, but they're not eating that much volume of vegetation anyhow. So they're not getting all the pomegranates and blueberries and the kale and the red cabbage. They're missing out on that. And that's another key component to nitric oxide. By being plant-based, we have bigger arteries because our arteries are cleaner, so they already don't have atherosclerosis. They're vasodilating because of the nitric oxide. If we do the nasal breathing and humming, we have the advantage. And if we add more polyphenols, fruits and vegetables to our diet, then we're creating even more there. One of the disadvantages of a meat-based or a fast food diet is that there was an article in the American Journal of Clinical, or it was American Journal of Cardiology, that they showed that one high-fat meal can diminish endothelial function, that's the inner part of the artery, but for 6 hours. Every time you're eating high-fat meals, high sugar meals, high sodium meals, and also high amounts of alcohol, we're really disrupting the production of nitric oxide. And unfortunately, in a standard American diet, it's all about sugar. It's all about salt, right? It's all about fast food and saturated fat and cholesterol. And unfortunately, a lot of those people continue to drink alcohol, many of the athletes. Already, it's almost like an unfair advantage putting somebody who follows a plant-based diet against somebody who follows a meat-based diet or a fast food diet. And it's the same thing, even if you're not an athlete. You have such an advantage. You've stacked the deck in your favor when you're eating a plant-based diet. It's like, it really is almost, it just doesn't seem that fair. One of the other things that we need to look at in a meat-based diet versus plant-based diet is that one of the biggest drivers of cardiovascular disease is blood viscosity, the thickness of the blood. And every time you're eating fruits and vegetables, you're consuming water. But you're consuming water that has electrolytes and vitamins and minerals and polyphenols and anthocyanins, all these great plant components. But it's that water that you're taking in that prevents that hypovolemia, the blood from getting thick. Your blood should be looking more like grape juice than molasses. So let's say kale or carrot in a juicer, you get kale juice or carrot juice. So you get a liquid. But if you put a bagel, right, or you put bread or chips in a juicer, you don't get chip juice or bagel juice. There's no hydration in there, and it's loaded with sodium, which is going to rob your body of water. One of the advantages of a plant-based diet is the massive amounts of electrolytes and water that we can take in that prevent some of that blood from getting thicker. And the main advantage for a plant-based diet is that we're not consuming all the saturated fat and cholesterol that really causes the thickness. And what maybe Dr. Heydrich, you can remember back in the day, probably 30 something years ago, Dr. McDougall used the term blood sludging and blood clumping. And a lot of that research came from Dr. Roy Swank, who was one of the top experts in the world on MS. And what they really showed is that when you are eating a high-fat meal for breakfast, that fat starts slowly getting into the arteries and it starts causing those red blood cells to clump together. If you have a 4-lane highway and cars are zipping along really fast, suddenly there's an accident and now there's only one lane. Imagine the problem with transportation that would take place if that was to occur for 12 hours. All those trucks that are trying to deliver food to this grocery stores, they're not going to get there. And it's the same thing in our body. Those red blood cells that are trying so desperately to get to the brain to deliver oxygen, they're impeded. They're not getting there. And your brain is only about 2 to 3% of your body's weight, but it uses over 20% of your body's oxygen. It's the greatest oxygen sponge around your brain, and it constantly requires oxygen. When you have this blood sludging and clumping taking place because you had too many tablespoons of oil, or even in the vegan world, you ate too many handfuls of nuts, there's an issue there with your performance. You do need to be careful also as a vegan. But generally, if you're following a whole food plant-based diet and you're omitting oils and you're only eating a little bit of nuts throughout the day, that's such an advantage for you, for your arteries, because you don't get that blood sludging or you don't get the blood clumping. Does that make sense? Those arteries are open, and that's critical because once you start getting, most of these dementias happen to be vascular. This insufficiency of blood flow through the carotid or vertebral arteries here that don't get to the brain, and they don't allow you to think efficiently. If you have high blood pressure, that's going to be atherosclerosis there in the kidney area. And then you couple that with high fat, the arteries are already closed up. And now you're getting all these red blood cells to stick together. They can't get where they need to go. That's what impotence is. Impotence they used to think it was psychogenic. They used to think it was more emotional and mental, but now they've realized that it's basically heart disease. It's just heart disease. And some people it's actually very common for people to get heart attacks on Monday after they've had terrible eating on the weekend and no activities and lots of stress. And then Monday comes along and they get a heart attack. It really only could take one fatty meal coupled with dehydration to cause somebody to have a major catastrophic event. These are things that we have to be careful of, but on the vegan or plant-based eating, we kind of have the edge because we're already eating fruits and vegetables. We're getting all the hydration. We're staying away from those oils. We're not getting the blood sludging. We're not getting the clumping. And also remember that nitric oxide prevents platelet aggregation. It prevents those blood cells from sticking together. You just have advantage after advantage after advantage when you're following a plant-based diet. I mean, it's like when people ask me, why am I encouraging? Because I work a lot with people who are professional athletes or people in Hollywood, stuntmen and actors, and they kind of keep up to date. They're like, why do you really promote this plant-based diet so much? And I rattle off this information to them. I said, like Dr. Greger always says, if a plant-based diet only could prevent reverse heart disease, which it can, that would be good enough reason to follow it. Just because it can do those two things. And we're not even talking about reducing disease everywhere else and increasing energy and preventing you from all sorts of maladies. It's almost just seems like it's inconceivable that there's people out there trying to argue against a plant-based diet because all the science just keeps stacking up how beneficial it is. I mean, you really can't argue it. And then for me, I like the science, but also when I see it work with my clients, it's a beautiful thing. When you're working with clients that have intermittent claudication, when their calves, they don't get enough blood flow there, they have atherosclerosis there, and you're able to help them reverse that plaque in there, just like Dr. Dean Orner showed, it's quite miraculous to them when they can walk without having any pain. And you're explaining to them that we're reversing atherosclerosis. We're seeing kids today that have been killed in automobile accidents. We're seeing them at age of 3 with atherosclerosis already in the arteries. When they autopsy them and they see the arteries are already getting streaks in there. I mean, that's 100% diet and lifestyle. And then you're seeing kids that are in their early teens that already have measurable blockages. And I mean, this is lifestyle and something that we need to really, for everyone out there who's plant-based, in a very loving, kind way, we really need to try to encourage family and friends to try to adopt some of these practices because it can save their life. And the scariest disease that I've seen working in this field for 40 years has been dementia. I don't think there's anything scarier than when somebody loses their computer. I mean, people freak out if they lose their phone or their phone gets dropped, but that's just a little device. What happens when you start losing your mental marbles and you can't remember things and you forget things, right? Or you're agitated and angry more. You have attention deficit. You can't focus. I mean, most people can only focus for 8 seconds or so. We really lost the ability cognitively to do things that we're designed to do. And that's a dietary and lifestyle practice. But I will say that with all the people that I've worked with who have had dementia, as much as I feel terrible and sad for them, it's the family who gets destroyed the most, because if they become caregivers, they get a heart attack or a stroke, they have a nervous breakdown, they have marital conflicts, they just break down. Dementia is something that we really need to work on preventing. And when you start looking at a plant-based diet and understanding that it's basically the ultimate way to reduce inflammation, it's the ultimate way to increase circulation to the brain, it's the ultimate way to give nutrients to the brain. And the big one is it protects the brain. Remember, the brain is composed of mostly fat. All day long, your brain is working, the most metabolic organ in your body, producing free radicals all day long, and they're constantly have the ability to damage the brain. When you're eating a plant-based diet, you're putting on almost like a metal cap, preventing acid rain from destroying the brain. If people would just understand these things, that this is why a plant-based diet is so important to prevent dementia, to prevent heart disease and all these diseases, I mean, we would have so less of a problem in society today. But it's such a simple solution because there's no drugs or no treatments or anything needed that people just kind of poo-poo it. But when you look at the civilizations that live this way, when you look at the blue zones, for instance, and you see these people living a simple lifestyle, eating simple way of eating, they're not supplementing with a million different supplements. They're not using any wacky therapies. They're just living good old-fashioned way of life. And they don't have these disease, they don't have the dementia. That should speak for itself right there. We shouldn't even need to be doing all the scientific studies. We can just emulate some of these tribal communities. That's basically what I say to clients when they come to me, and trying to encourage them to transition to a plant-based diet, this is one of the things that I try to explain to them. This is why I'm adamant. Now, the truth be told, I have a lot of tough clients. A lot of clients aren't going to make that transition 100%. But in those cases, then I use some different supplements, and I really try hard to get like a green juice in their diet, whether it's a powder or fresh green juice, to get that nitric oxide. I ask them to put it in their mouth and swish it in their mouth for 20 seconds or so before they swallow it, to let that bacteria start creating those nitrates, and then it creates the nitric oxide. I have to meet people where they're at, because they're just not willing to sit down and eat big salads, or they're not willing to eat lots of vegetables. I just meet them where they're at. But to tell you, there's a lot of vegans that don't eat many vegetables either. I know lots of vegans that are eating all these refined hamburgers and vegan hot dogs and vegan cheeses. And not only are they loaded with coconut oil, saturated fat oil, they're loaded with sodium for sure. They have the two things that damage the endothelial right there, is high fat, high sodium. And then they also get very tired from that. It's not an energy producing meal. And when you're tired, you reach for stimulants, and those stimulants are often high sugar foods. And those high sugar foods then damage the endothelial again. It's this vicious cycle. Just because somebody says they're vegan or they don't eat animal products, they're not really telling me what they eat. They're just not saying what they eat. They're telling me what they don't eat, right? We do, in the vegan community, we do have to get back to our roots and make sure that we understand, when you use the term plant-based diet, that it's based on plants, right? And green leafy plants in particular. There's really not any studies that are being done, or there's not many people, other than maybe a few paleo carnivore type of people, that don't believe that green leafies are the secret to everything. I mean, even Dr. Esselstyn wants his clients to have 6 handfuls a day. Again, what a great way to increase that nitric oxide production. I kind of have to work with these clients that are a little tougher to work with. They're not like seasoned people like Dr. Heydrich, who's been eating this way for so long. And many of you, they're not used to it. And truth be told, the more alkaline you eat, if you're acidic, it's kind of like a cross to a vampire. It's repulsive. You don't want to go near it. So I do start with them gently, and I'll have them do green drinks. I'll have them do smoothies. And with the smoothies, they can add a little bit of fruit that doesn't feel so alkaline to them, but they're still getting the alkalinity. But I do ask people, if you are doing smoothies, again, make sure that it's a non-dairy milk, loaded with dark or green leafy vegetables, and a little bit of fruit, particularly berries if you can, and then a little sweetener if you need a little sweetener, a date or some dried pineapple or some mango or something that's going to give it enough to be palatable. And then when you eat it or drink it, try to use a spoon or a straw and take little bites, and again, let it sit in the back of your mouth so you can get that nitric oxide production right there. That's really important. If you're a good eater and you don't mind eating greens, one of the benefits of blended soups is that when you make a blended soup, you basically made a warm green smoothie, which is beautiful. And then just make sure when you eat that soup, again, you let it swish in your mouth a little bit. Take your time when you eat it. Get as much of that nitric oxide to create as we can. It's critical for you. One of the other things that I see in the vegan community, and this is where a lot of the people have disagreed with me in the past, but now are coming around, is that as people get older, they don't have the same digestive abilities as they did when they were young. Their hydrochloric acid and pepsin and things like that diminish. When that diminishes, you can't compare the grams of protein that you ate when you were 20 and you had optimal digestion to now when you're 60 and 70. It's not the same. You don't break those foods apart the same. So not only are you not extracting as many nutrients, but one of the main nutrients you're not breaking down as much is protein. That's why when you eat corn and you see it pass through, well, if you were eating a can of corn, and I'm just making up a number, it said it had 15 grams of protein. Well, you surely didn't absorb 15 grams of protein because you're seeing all that corn pass through. It's the same thing in our diet now. As people get older and they get sarcopenia, they start getting this muscle wasting. There's issues with their bones. Look at, there's myths upon myths. And one of the myths is when you're vegan, you always get all the protein you need. And that's not the case, because it depends on how good your digestion is. How well do you masticate or chew the food, right? Seniors don't have good dental oftentimes, and it hurts. They opt for softer foods, and they don't chew as well, and their digestion isn't good. And there's lots of people on proton pump inhibitors and all sorts of things. One of the things I recommend is getting more into blended things like blended smoothies and blended soups. It gives you the advantage of breaking apart that cell wall, and your ability to absorb those amino acids is going to be increased. And I was happy to see that Brenda Davis recently came out with her book on protein. And I've talked with her on the phone many times about that. And we both agreed, especially as people getting older, digestion is something that gets impaired. We do need to be cautious with that. As a vegan, just make sure you're kind of conscientious of that you are using some blended mechanisms, whether it's a blender or a hand blender, or if you have the ability to chew really well and use your own blender, your teeth, just make sure you really chew foods very well. I just haven't seen that with many of the clients I work with, because I'll be sometimes at events with them and they eat very fast. And I've seen some of the big leaders in our movements eat meals so fast that I wouldn't even be done with like a small portion, and they're done with their whole plate. It's not just people that get older that need to be conscientious of it. It's anybody. One of the things that I use, and you can go, I don't sell them, but on my site, I have a list of different like green powders that I like, or there's some beet products there that increase nitric oxide. I do like those, and particularly when I'm traveling, because I know when I go to conferences, and I've been to conferences with Dr. Heidrich before. Matter of fact, I remember being at one that I get up at like 5 a.m. and I'm opening my blinds and it's still pretty dark out. And I'm seeing somebody running toward me, and I'm wondering who the heck would be running at 5 a.m. And as she got closer, I realized it was Dr. Ruth Heidrich running. We've been to conferences before, and one of the challenges is when you're an instructor there, you're either at your booth or you're talking to people in the hallway, or you're putting your class, you're taking all the exercise gear and putting it back in your room. I miss meals all the time. What I rely on oftentimes is kind of shakes that I have to make myself because I'm not getting enough greens. I use a green powder. And when you buy a green powder, you want to get a powder that's in glass. Don't buy powders that are in plastic, not only for the environment, because that plastic is not going to get recycled, but for yourself, remember that those plastic, especially when it gets heated, those plasticizers, BPA, all that stuff, that can get absorbed into your powder. You're paying a lot of money for a good organic green powder, so make sure that it's in glass when you use it. When I travel, I bring a kind of a shaker glass with me, and I have a water filter, and then I use some green powder. I use some beet powder that I have, and then sometimes I use some chia seeds or other things. I make a little bit of a shake just so I do get some of the greens. Because remember, when you're using a green powder, they're just taking kale and bok choy and everything and dehydrating it, putting it in they basically blend it first, then they dehydrate it. And then they just, that's all this powder is. It's just basically blended up vegetables, right? Instead of me having to sit down at a meal, which I'll miss most of the time, I just take those in. So when you travel, don't stop the program you're following. Because I would say 99% of my clients who are trying to lose weight go off on when they go on vacation. And I want my clients to eat stricter and have a stricter regimen when they're out of town than when they're at home, because I want them to tighten the screws so they're better when they're out of town than when they're at home. I don't want them to lower it, because when they get home, they've already been on a low. They're used to high salt, high sugar, high oil. Now their addictive brain keeps craving that. It's going to take them a long time to get back to normal. When you travel, it's important that you bring foods with you. When I taught in India, I brought a suitcase and a half of food with me. Even though I was teaching at a vegan ashram, I wanted to make sure that I had things just in case they coated everything with oil and I didn't even know what exactly how it was going to be prepared. So I bring the food with me, and if I don't need it, guess what? I just bring it back home and I just leave it in my suitcase. It's kind of a constant travel stuff that I always have. The other thing when I travel is I travel with exercise bands. You don't want to stop moving when you're out of town, especially when you start thinking about your arteries. You're sitting, like Dr. Heidrich just mentioned, she sets her timer every 15 minutes to remind her to get out of her chair and move. Well, think about it. Most people, they get up in the morning, they take an Uber to the airport, so they're sitting. They get to the airport, they sit 2 hours before their plane leaves, right? Then they get on their plane for 3 to 4 hours, they're sitting. Then they get to their event and they sit, right? Every conference I've attended, everyone is sitting. There's nothing worse for your circulatory system than that. So you want the green powders, you want to eat your greens, you want to move your body, get that vasodilation going. With bands, there's really no exercise that you can do at a gym that I can't replicate with bands. I have what's called a door attachment, but attaches to a door. So now it looks like just a cable machine. There's nothing I can't do with it. When you travel, make sure that you're constantly moving. When I get to the airport, one of the first things I do is once I check in, I get my water filter, I filter up, I get some water, and then I just take my luggage, whether it's a backpack or a rolling, and I just walk for the next hour or hour and a half till I have to board my plane. And then when I get on the plane, the one thing you want to do is you want to keep tapping your feet and moving your feet. You want to get up and move as much as you can, go in the back of the plane and stretch, especially when I was going to India. That's big travel, or Germany or Turkey, other places that I've taught at. You have to make sure that you're constantly moving, because you don't want travel to beat you down. You want travel to be something that empowers you. And then when you come back home, you feel energized and you feel great. Just make sure that you keep that in mind, that as a vegan, you're always this ambassador of trying to help other people and be an ambassador of health and fitness and goodwill. I remember once I was teaching for this company that produced vegan foods. And I then when I was done lecturing for them, I got to the airport and I was walking for a while, and then I squatted down, what they call an Asian squat. Have you ever heard that before? They call it an Indonesia squat, when you just go all the way down. And the owner of the company happened to walk right by me and stop. And he looked right at me. He said, JP, we just heard you lecture. He goes, you're walking your talk. You're actually doing your stretching. When you're at these airports and things, there's a lot of things that you can do to keep yourself active. Some airports now even have health clubs in there. You can pay to go into a health club if you're there early enough. I just prefer to keep walking. I drink my green drink, kind of swish it around my mouth. I use my beet stuff. And then when I get to my hotel, I have my food. And then I just kind of go set up my booth and start teaching pretty much right away. So I know a lot of you that are watching do travel a lot. That's something you might want to think about, is doing that. The other thing I want to mention is that as important as I think a plant-based diet is, there's something that's better for you than a plant-based diet, and that's living a vegan lifestyle. A plant-based diet is basically a diet. It tells us a little bit about what you eat, but it doesn't tell me how you live your life. When you follow a vegan lifestyle is based on love. It's based on compassion. It's based on taking care of the planet and being kind to other people. Be very cautious in your day-to-day life about the interactions that you have with people, social media, texting. Make sure that everything that you allow that comes into your fertile garden that's going to get planted is something positive. Don't be around people who are negative, who are abusive. Stay away from those types of people, because they'll beat you down. And that's why so many people that I work with a lot of trauma therapists as clients. And the stories that I hear about the trauma these little kids have and what they turned out to be when they were 20 and 30 and 40, it's always just one big dysfunction junction. It's a mess. And part of it has to do with the programming. Be conscientious of when you watch the news. It's always sensational, it's negative, it's violent, it's disturbing. That's not a good thing for your mental health and your psyche, especially somebody who wants to teach to people to be kinder and more loving in the world, and yet you're putting all this negativity in. And then to say the other thing that's just as powerful is be conscientious of the words that you let out, because words are very similar to like a bow and arrow. Once you release that arrow, you don't call it back. It's released. It's not coming back. The harm that word did is oftentimes going to be with somebody for many, many years, because many of my clients have told me the words their parents said to them. They called them fatty when they were a little girl, or they called them dum-dum or weakling. And 40 years later, they're in my office telling me how to this day they can't get that out of their mind. So be conscientious of the words. Sticks and stones can break your bones, but words can tear your heart apart. So be conscientious of the words that you let in and then the words that you say. Those are important. When you follow a vegan lifestyle, understand that lifestyle is based on a word called ahimsa, which is compassion and reverence for all expressions of life. For the smallest little ant and bumblebee to a majestic whale or a wolf, they're all equal. They all deserve to be loved and they all deserve kindness. And it's the same thing with people. When we meet people in our movement that are paleo or they're against what we do, hey, look, they were born a blank computer like we were. They had to be programmed to be who they are. We should never hold that against them. We should be a representative of kindness and show them love, show them respect. Ask them, can they present some more information, some science on what they're trying to say? Here's our science. Here's Dr. Greger's science. Here's Dr. McDougall's science. And have good discussions. We don't need to fight with them. I've been involved in the animal rights field for 40 years, and never when I was at a fur store, protesting a fur store or a rodeo or a circus, was I ever disrespectful to anyone. I just held a pamphlet and I just gave people pamphlets to show them what was happening behind the scenes here. Never did I argue. I thanked them for taking it. I was very respectful to them. Just kind of keep that in mind, because I think that's more important for your health, and others' health, is the energy that you have with either if you have anger and hostility or you have love and kindness. And always remember that when you get squeezed, just like when you squeeze an orange juice comes out. You don't get apple juice. Well, when you get squeezed, take a look and see what comes out. When people pressure you and are not nice to you, do you respond back with road rage and anger? Or are you understanding and kind to them? Because that's going to tell you a lot about where you are in life. And maybe when you see that, you'll want to make some more changes because you really don't like what you see when you realize that when you're squeezed, what comes out is you. That's who you are. Does that make sense, Lorraine? I think it's a critical component of what I teach. And one of the things I did in retirement homes is I used to always say at the end of my lecture, if you were going up in the elevator to your room tonight and you got in the elevator with somebody who was kind of snappy and mean to you, and you snapped back and you were mean with them and you huff and puffed away, and the next day you heard at breakfast they passed away, I said, how would you feel? And everybody, 100% of the audience would always say they would feel terrible. And I'd say, why would you feel terrible? And they always said, because the last thing they heard was their negativity. You were angry at them. And I said, okay, let's change it around. What if they were mean and snappy with you in the elevator? And instead you said, hey, it sounds like you're having a rough night. Would you like to talk a little bit? I'm here for you. And you extended love. You extended compassion to them. And the next day you found out they passed away. How would you feel? And everybody says, I tried. I tried to be nice to them. I tried. At least the last thing they heard was somebody caring. And that's how we have to remember everybody that we meet. We don't know what their past was and what trauma they had. And your one word of kindness might be the only word that they've heard all day. And I learned that because when I used to work with the retirement homes, the people would say that to me. It was so nice that you came up to me and put your hand on my shoulder, or you checked in to see how I was doing. I never thought anything about it. And yet these people, it meant more to them than anything to the seniors. Just keep that in mind. The plant-based diet is powerful. It's healthy. It's good. But if you follow just a plant-based diet and you're mean and angry and you're not doing good for humanity, you're not going to get the same benefits that you would with somebody who's following a vegan lifestyle. Okay. I do want to talk just quickly. I want to show a few movements that I think are important. One of the things that I started over 30 years ago was these fall prevention programs. And one of the things that I keep seeing all the time is when somebody takes a fall, we have about 10,000 deaths a year to seniors taking falls, which is terrible. We have basically people that get injuries that cause permanent disability. That's horrible. But a good majority of most everyone who takes a fall has a lot of apprehension and fear and becomes very fragile mentally. And so one of the things is as important it is to do strength training and do some aerobic activity and stretching. That's all important. And if you have osteoporosis, I've got news. You can live with osteoporosis, but you're probably not going to live very long as if you break a hip or you break your femur or you fracture your back. So you want to spend some of your time doing exercises that work a particular balance. I just want to show you a few that are so simple that you can do on a daily basis that aren't difficult. You don't have to try them if you're scared, and you don't have to try them if you're not capable. You can just watch. But the first one is all I'm going to do is I'm just going to step to my right and balance on one foot, and I'm going to step to my left and balance on one foot. I'm just rocking left and right, and I want to try to hold it for 1 second, and I want you to feel for that 1 second, how stable do you feel? When you get here, are you going like this to catch your balance? Or are you stepping and you're owning it like the Statue of Liberty? Just get that going a little bit. And if you find that 1 second is too easy, then hold for 2 seconds. Our ultimate goal is 3 seconds. And our ultimate goal is to go a little bit faster and more aggressive to the side and hold for 3 seconds. We're just going to step left and count to 1, 2, and then the other side 1, 2. And if that's easy, then you can go to 3. But the wider the step, the harder it is. And the faster the step, the harder it is. So we start with 1 second, and then our goal is to get happily stable at 2. And then the advanced version is 3. I don't need much more than 3 seconds with my clients because I just have them eventually hop. Eventually, I'll have them hopping. So I don't need to go more than 3 seconds. What we're trying to do is mimic when somebody falls and they catch themselves on one leg, that they have the ability to stabilize and hold themselves and then put their foot down. Now, let's try that going forward and back. Just step forward on one foot and then backwards on the other. We step forward on one, we hold for 1/1000, backwards on the other foot for 1/1000. Always on one foot. And when that becomes too easy, we go to 2 seconds, 1, 2, and then backwards, 1, 2, forward, 1, 2, and backwards, 1, 2. If that becomes too easy, we go to our ultimate goal, which is 3 seconds forward, 3 seconds back. And then for someone like really fit, like Dr. Heydrich, when that becomes too easy, then it's a little bit of a gentle hop. Not much, but it's a little hop. Then that's when we have a little bit more of a challenge. So then what you do is then you just take your arms and you're just going to rotate your arms left and right, and you're going to continue rotate them as you step. And then that's going to really throw us off a lot. We rotate, but we've got to maintain that 3 seconds. And then we step, and then our 3 seconds. And then when we go forward and back, our arms are just going to go like that, forward and back. And that throws us off. That's how we make it a little bit more difficult. Now, for people who are being challenged with 1 second, that's fine. Don't worry. I can make it as hard as I want. When I'm working with an athlete, when they hop and they land like this, I take my arm and I knock them, and then they have to have balance. When they go forward, I push them, and they've got to maintain their balance. When they get good at that, then I throw them a medicine ball, and they catch it, and they have to maintain their balance. It starts out really easy, then we make it much more difficult, okay? Now, the last one I want to show you is one of the biomarkers of aging is how well can you balance on one foot, just static. Get a chair or a table that you can hold on and just hold on to the table, then balance on one foot and try to let go. You count to 30 seconds. So do your own counting for 30 seconds. It's important that we want to get to 30 seconds. I'm not saying you have to get it today, but we want to be able to get to 30 seconds. It's critical that eventually weeks and months go that we can get to 30 seconds. And then once you count to 30, you can switch. But if you're going like this, that's okay. It means you're being very challenged if you're moving. If you're like the Statue of Liberty and it's not a challenge and you can do 30 seconds, then you can do the movement with your arms like this and see if you can do that for 30 seconds. That's much harder. But our goal, this biomarker of aging, this is very similar to when we test somebody's grip strength, their ability to balance on one foot. It's a way that we can determine how fast somebody's aging. How are they accelerating their aging? Are they maintaining, or are they actually almost de-aging? Some of my clients started out kind of like a willow in the wind, bending and moving everywhere. And now they're just static and just like the Statue of Liberty. Then we just go to the more advanced stuff. Those are 3 exercises, the lateral one, the forward and back, and then the static hold. We want to try to sneak those in throughout the day. Like Dr. Heydrich, when your alarm goes off and you're doing, I know you do some nitric oxide exercises, and your movement, also include the balance in there, just so you have that balance. Because the best thing you could do is practice it with your bare foot, because then the little tiny muscles in your feet are going to be getting a workout trying to grab the floor. Remember, there's over 200,000 different nerve endings in our feet. They're telling us what's in our environment. They sense vibration, temperature. They're sensing the what the environment looks like. Is it slippery? Is it stones? It's very important to try to go barefoot as much as you can. And that every time you touch the ground in barefoot, you're actually stimulating your brain and you're making your feet stronger. One of the things that I do with some of my clients, one, I insist that they go barefoot at home all the time. And then when they go out, there's a particular shoe that I like. It's on my website. You'll see it. It's a flat heel, and it's got a very wide toe box. When you look at Aboriginal people's feet that don't have shoes, their feet and toes are this wide. When you look at ours, they look like that, because that's 20, 30 years of being crammed into this tiny little box. It's like putting your foot in a coffin. It's not good for you, and it's not good for your balance. I remember I was working once with an FBI agent that had horrible balance. They needed to improve their balance. I was training them. I said, how often do you go barefoot at home? They said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, yeah, like when you get home, you take your shoes off, right? And they said, no, they never were going barefoot. I said, okay, all I want you to do, your only exercise is to go barefoot at home. And when I saw them next time, their balance got better. And each week it got better without any balance exercises, just the ability to start going more barefoot. Don't be afraid to do some barefoot walking, as long as your physician says it's okay for you to be barefoot. But it's important for your brain, and it's important for your balance that you have the ability to be able to grab and sense the earth. I'm happy to answer any questions. And of course, Dr. Esselstyn has talked about the 6 handfuls of greens forever. Here's what, it was so funny because I did a lecture on smoothies, and Dr. Esselstyn and his wife, his wonderful wife, were in the front row. And when I started with smoothies, I said, I looked at, because they're pretty much talking against smoothies, right? And I looked at them and I said, give me a chance and then you'll hear me. And I explained my rationale for smoothies. And afterwards he came up to me and said, that was brilliant. The reason I recommend smoothies is because I'm dealing with the real world. And when we look at science, all the doctors that talk on science, not Dr. Esselstyn, but I'm just taking other doctors, they're right. We got to chew that food and do that. But when I work with the lady who's got 3 kids in different schools and is running around to PTA meetings and has got issues working 2 jobs, it's not realistic that she's going to sit and eat a salad for an hour. It's better she does that. I wish I could do that, but I don't. And I know most of my clients can't. So my goal for my clients is just get those greens in any way I can. Better to chew it 100%. But it's not realistic for my clients. And then the other thing I do with those clients is I make sure that I get a green powder for them. I have them just put it in their mason jar and they just sip on it throughout the day to get that nitric oxide created and to get more alkaline and more greens that they normally wouldn't get. Well, the first thing with blenders, so yeah, I have all the blenders. I have the Vitamix, I have BlendTech, and then I have the hand immersion. I personally use the hand immersion from an environmental standpoint, because when I use the immersion blender and I blend it, usually like in like my glass mason jar or sometimes a stainless steel, when I'm done, I just unscrew it and it takes me literally 5 seconds to clean it. So I don't use a lot of water. With what I use a blender, it takes forever to clean it. So from an environmental standpoint, I use my immersion more, but I have a BlendTech and I have a Vitamix. So I think anything, I would go and look at a thrift store first before buying something new. Try to reuse. Our organization is big into not trying to purchase new things. If somebody has an extra blender, they're on Craigslist, they're on Nextdoor. People practically give them away. So anything that's going to might break up the cell wall is kind of what we're looking for. But remember, with smoothies, we're looking for green smoothies, not fruit smoothies. Unless somebody's really elderly and doesn't get enough calories or they're young, then I add more fruit, but we're looking for greens. Again, remember, if you have the ability, try still to chew greens at home. It's good for your jaw. and it's better in the long run. But smoothies are just a part of natural living. It's like people who drive. It's hard to get away from it. Even though I don't have a car, I understand it's a part of normal life. That's 100% of the kids that when parents bring their kids in to see me, the kids they have that attitude, or a wife brings her husband in to see me. And the truth of the matter is I'm not here to coerce anyone to change. All I am is a provider of information. So I provide information to people, and they ultimately decide what they want to do with it. But I do try to give those folks some websites, whether it's Physicians Committee for Responsible Medicine or Dr. Greger's Nutrition Facts, anything like that, to just educate them. I also say, hey, do you want to watch some documentaries, whether it's Game Changers or Forks Over Knives? So they have a little bit different take on things, because a lot of my clients say, well, they feel fine. Well, but they don't, in comparison to what? They've been eating and drinking and living this way their whole life. So they don't really have a comparison. So I just provide information. So I do try to reach people where they're at, but I never try to coerce somebody, because I just don't feel that's right. If people feel they're happy smoking and drinking and doing what they do, but I don't feel that it's my right to try to coerce them. Raw, I mean, I like the idea of raw, because when you cook it, we're losing predominantly like vitamin C, because it's heat sensitive, and some of the B vitamins. But the advantage of cooked is you get more volume, and it's easier on people's digestive system because it breaks apart the fiber a little bit. So I do a combination for people with raw and cooked. But just the secret is when you're chewing it, just make sure that, again, let it sit in your mouth. And take your time chewing it. Let it get on the back, that rear portion of your tongue. And if you're getting older, I personally recommend, because when you look at the stats and you start seeing how that nitric oxide production diminishes when you're 60 and 70, and it's really gets low, you really have to have the edge, especially if you're kind of an athlete, or even if you're not, you just want to have more nitric oxide. Then I really like the juicing, green juice, because you can really just let it sit on the back of your mouth. I like the powder because it's convenient and you can travel with it. Well, zero oils, unless somebody was anorexic or somebody was elderly and there was a reason we needed to get a lot of calories in them quickly. But I'd always opt first for avocados or nut butters and nuts and seeds. It's just that the oils are really an issue when I was talking about blood viscosity and that blood sludging and clumping. Those oils contribute to that considerably. And if you couple that with dehydration, which many people are subclinically dehydrated, and then you couple that with somebody who has occlusion or occlusion of the artery, that's a disaster right there. You got three things going against you. So there's no benefits really for most people for oils. But if that's what it's going to take for you to eat vegetables, then I encourage you to get a spray bottle and spray the oil on the vegetables that way, so you get less of it, just a light mist of it to give you flavor. You can always check out my website, thejohnpierre.com, and then my sanctuary, which is livingwithharmony.org. There's lots of free videos and info there.
Well, thank you so much for all the good work you've been doing, and mahalo for this wonderful presentation today.